what only my image will be recorded in the recording. So welcome again, everyone. So good to be here with you. I think everybody's been here before, so you all know how this is going to go. We're going to have a little bit of me setting the stage, and then we'll have a guided meditation and a comfort break, and then my sharing on our principle this week, which is commitment to cross movement organizing. And then we're going to have time for reflections from all the participants. No sharing is ever required. And if you do have, a question or a comment, feel free to raise your hand. You don't have to wait for me to stop talking. So I just want to affirm that I've spotlighted myself, so I'm the only image that's being recorded when we come to sharing time. If you prefer not to have your voice or your image recorded, then I can stop the recording. If you just want to, if you feel like you'd like to have your voice recorded, just turn off your video and, share. So everybody, again, you all know me. So my identity statement is on my website, Sangha Is All. You all know that I identify as a person who is racialized, sexualized, and disabled by the culture that I live in. And today I'm wearing this lovely shirt, Nothing About Us Without Us, to express my connection to disability justice. So before I do anything else, I want to make sure that I offer gratitude to all the resources that help me to share with you today. So obviously, Sins Invalid, always wanting to offer gratitude to Sins Invalid for their cultivation of the 10 principles of disability justice. But also because for what I've done this week, I've referred to a number of different types of works, maybe than what I usually do. I really want to offer gratitude to the researchers, writers, journalists, historians, archivists, and others, all those individuals who have recorded and preserved the events of their day as completely and as objectively as possible, because it makes the type of sharing that I'm going to offer with you today possible. I really don't believe that anything is truly original. My thinking, which arises from the chemical processes in my body, may put things together sort of spontaneously in a unique way. But I am so reliant on all the wisdom that's been shared and cultivated throughout the years that it seems a huge mistake of ego to say that I'm really saying anything original. And then, of course, I want to offer gratitude for all the beings that perhaps have supported me, but that I'm not necessarily going to name today. So at this moment, I do want to offer an opportunity if anybody would like to introduce themselves, talk about their identities, anything at all like that. Just raise your hand. Let me know if you'd like to do that before we go into the guided meditation. Okay. So in the reminder that I sent out for this gathering today, I said that events in today's world present important opportunities to focus on alliance co-creation and mutual respect. So anytime there is something disoriented in our environment, any time that seems like it throws us off center, while that's a true and valid experience of being disoriented and feeling off center, it also presents the opportunity to realign and recenter ourselves. So, as distasteful, perhaps difficult as it may be, just calling in our agency to realign and recenter. So, at the same time, winter, the lengthening of daily darkness hours, provides an essential reminder that we rest, care for ourselves, and rejuvenate. Just to talk for a bit longer, when I started reading And Grandma Said, which I've shared with you from that book previously, I really was expecting, I was so excited. I picked up that book and I thought, I am going to begin to receive the indigenous version of Shakyamuni's teachings. Because, Shakyamuni has lots of lists and very explicit instructions and parameters that are offered to us. But that's not at all what I found. I didn't find anything like that. I found no instructions. I found no parameters. I found things like discussions of peace and the calling in for peace without an examination of what peace was or how to generate it. And at first I was puzzled, and then I realized, wait a minute, I get it. In the oral tradition, it wasn't about telling you what to do. It was about inviting you into experience, inviting you to listen deeply in yourself, to receive not just the words, but the environment and the intention into which the words were spoken, and to metabolize that into yourself, into your own being, and to embody it, so that in receiving the call for peace, as we digest it, as we metabolize that call, we begin to embody it, we begin to become peace. So calling in this moment of practice for us as a time of receiving, metabolizing, and embodying. Also from And Grandma Said, and calling in the awareness of the wind elements from the opening ceremony. The wind elements. It is said that the north and east winds bring a blanket of snow to cover Mother Earth and allow her to rest from all of her acts of creation and support. So, right here, right now, beginning to prepare your meditation space by calling in, allowing to come to you and to descend upon you with gentleness and care. That blanket, that experience that deeply invites you to rest, to receive, and to metabolize and embody rest, to become rest. And perhaps even allowing awareness of how this blanket of care can come to you without effort. There's nothing required. Simply a sitting back, breathing, and allowing. And as that blanket, whatever your blanket looks like, as that blanket descends upon you, perhaps really noticing its qualities, your unique blanket of care, and the unique way that it embraces you, enfolds you, its colors, its weight, its textures. Whatever else you may be noticing about this blanket of care. Just allowing all of that to begin to seep in, being absorbed through the skin, through the tissues, through the tendons, and even into the bones. That deep care of rest. If you receive this care, you may become aware of some part or parts of you that are resisting, that feel as though that's not for them, that rest is not for those parts of you. As you are able, just allowing the warmth that is in your heart to expand, to touch those parts, and just to invite them, no matter how difficult it may be, to put down whatever it is they're holding and to join you in rest, like a friend who's been laboring with you and maybe right now is having trouble stopping that labor. Spreading the blanket wide, making room for all those parts of you that may find it difficult to rest. Noticing your breath moving in and out without your effort, without conscious efforting. Noticing the care, the weight of this blanket of all the beautiful colors and textures that is resting upon you, and sensing into that invitation to rest and allowing some silence there. Pulling in an awareness into this opportunity to rest deeply, calling in an awareness of all the ways in which you create. Just like Mother Earth, you are also creating all the time, creating motion, creating activities, creating thoughts. Whatever it is you that springs to your mind is your creative activity. Just allowing yourself to embrace that, even if what springs to mind seems counterintuitive. We create in so many ways. Our creativity is part of what calls us to embrace rest. We are here together creating this space. and allowing that just to rest with you. That this is a space of rest, and that our existence in it is what creates it without effort. And allowing some silence there. Also, calling in to this experience of rest all of those parts of us that are too tired to rest, too tired, all the parts that say too much, too hard, just inviting your awareness to expand, to include that kind of resistance to rest, if it exists within you. I can't rest because I'm too tired. Allowing the warmth of your heart to expand, to invite and include those areas of resistance within yourself, those areas that are too tired, so tired that it does not seem like rest can come. Acknowledging that, listening to that, affirming that's exactly what it's like for those parts of you. Simply allowing yourself to be with that in this open-hearted way, knowing that the blanket that is resting upon you, that is caring for you, that is nurturing you, is big enough is warm enough and soft enough to encompass all of this too tired. Just resting with that, not doing anything, just being aware and allowing some silence around that. Thoughts to rest, intentions to rest, allowing your obligations to rest, allowing your whole body from the bone marrow all the way out to the air touching your skin, letting everything rest. And as we begin to move towards the close of this practice time, allowing all the sensations that unwound everything that released, everything that relaxed, everything that let go, allowing those sensations to imprint on your awareness, this relaxing, this unwinding, this releasing. Always present as potential, always present as a gift that your body can give. And perhaps allowing yourself to be aware of what it was like to invite that into your experiencing. And particularly noticing any aspect or part of yourself that most received the rest, most received and heard the invitation. Those parts of you, perhaps, that seemed unwilling or unable to rest. Patient to continue to be extended there, to be extended in all parts of yourself, receiving or not receiving, but unconditional offer, the unconditional invitation to rest, to care, to restore, to rejuvenate. I'm beginning to notice what it would be like to move back into this shared practice space of our community. Notice any movement that might want to come in your body, perhaps in your hands, in your neck, in your shoulders, perhaps twisting side to side. Whatever movement it is that your body would like to have, allowing that to arise. And slowly, as you are ready, finding that solid ground, whether it's a connection beneath your sit bones, a connection beneath your hands, your feet, the back of your head, your neck, whatever that solid, firm connection with the world is what's outside of your inner process. Allowing yourself to connect with that deeply, to receive the support of that. And knowing that even as you leave this active process of rest, you can call this in again at any time. Thank you so much for sharing this practice with me. We are going to move into our comfort break. And in just a moment, I will share some music that's perhaps appropriate for this time of year. And as you do what is most supportive for your rest, for your comfort, know that whatever it is you need is supported here. Hopefully everyone enjoyed those sort of irrelevant, irreverent, uh, sort of musical gifts. Okay, now I got to figure out how to turn off my sharing. I'm sorry, give me a second. Okay, so we are here today to talk about the Sins Invalid principle of commitment to cross movement organizing. And I'm posting that principle in the chat. Would anybody care to read that principle out?
I can do it.
Thank you, Amanda.
Commitment to cross-movement organizing, shifting how social justice movements understand disability and contextualize ableism. Disability justice lends itself to politics of alliance.
Thank you so much. So I'm actually going to maybe start to talk about that by taking a little detour into dharma for a second. And what I want to do is share my screen. Let's see if I've got the right. So I've talked about so far in the Eightfold Noble Path, I've talked about right view or right understanding, right action, and right livelihood. And I just wanted to share with you this little table that sort of shows how one of Buddha's followers, Dhammadinna, who is reputed to have been one of his foremost pupils and an ordained nun, created this grouping. Do I need to expand that Amanda, is it too hard to read?
But yeah, maybe a little bigger.
How's that? Let's see. How's that? Does that work?
That's good. Thanks.
So Dhammadinna created three groupings that I actually have been finding useful to work with. And the important thing to note is that it was always said that this is not like a list 1 to 8. It's not like you have to start in one place and go all the way through. So this is really a list or a set of groupings that is more about understanding the essence of the different elements. So right view and right intention are considered to be wisdom elements. So they have to do with the way that we apply our thoughts. Right speech, right action, and right livelihood are considered to be moral discipline elements that have to do with how we express our morality. What does that really represent for us? And of course, in Buddhism, it was intended to be the Buddhist moral, the Buddhist ethic, expressing that into the world. And then the third grouping, we apparently like to call concentration. It includes right effort, right mindfulness or remembering, and then right concentration. And the more that I work with this, the more that I understand, for my own purposes at least, that concentration is a very tricky word to use here, because in the West we tend to think of that as like really thinking hard about something, right? I'm so concentrating on this. It's like really intellectual brain effort. But I don't think that's really what it's intended to be. Because look at the Sanskrit word, samadhik khanda. Samadhik khanda. And samadhi, we have never understood to mean something about really focusing our minds. It has to do more with what's experienced. And so I have been beginning to look at concentration as, for anybody who cooks, like vanilla extract. You know, it's the essence, it's the distillation, like essential oils, that really getting to the essence of something, not by using my mind, but by allowing it to concentrate, allowing it to concentrate, to distill, to condense. And I just wanted to share that with you, because today, the element on the Eightfold Noble Path that I'd like to look, that I'm looking at, this principle of cross movement organizing as, is a concentration or a samadhic element, right effort, samavayana. And the definition that I'm giving to that, let me back up a second before I do that. So we might wonder, well, wait a second, what's the difference between action and effort? If I've got right action, sort of kind of towards, the top of the chart there, if I've got right action in the moral discipline element, then what's the difference between that and effort? And it's the concentration. It's the distillation, it's the essence. I believe that right effort is the concentration of the elements that came before. It's the concentration of, or the putting together with and distilling together your right view or understanding, your right intention that is related to that, and how you act in a moral way in the world, so that I come up with the definition that I posted here. It's cultivating and nurturing full, complete, very best, vigorous effort infused with focused and concentrated will, so that energy can be brought into our right actions and our moral discipline with dedication and persistence. So it might not immediately seem intuitive as to why this relates to cross movement organizing, but many times movements, not only do they think they're not related to each other, they might even see each other as competing. And so, if disability justice essentially requires a commitment to cross movement organizing, then we need to have, you know, consciously with us in our minds an awareness that we are cultivating and nurturing our very best efforts, our very best awareness in order to move into those cross movement partnerships. So I actually consider disability to be sort of the ultimate intersectional identity, because no human is exempt from the possibility of disability, the way our society defines it. And even though we don't commonly use those words, there are many other marginalized identities that are essentially disabled. We think they're not capable of something. We think they don't have the capacity for something. So marginalization inherently is a disablement. It has at its core a disablement. So to examine all this, I'm wanting today to go through sort of what I've been learning about the history of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the movement for disability justice, and how it came about. So the first thing I want to do is share with you just sort of some context. So if you start at the bottom, you'll see that the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed into law in 1990. And while, this is sort of my overview, there may be others who are better historians who might have a different starting point. I'm saying it was, a little bit less than 200 years prior to that, when in the US, there was a shift in thought that began to think about rehabilitation. So in 1918, there was a Veterans Rehabilitation Act. So the reason that this table has multiple columns is, I'm trying to show what is addressed by each of these things. So the Smith-Sears Veteran Rehabilitation Act addressed both vocational training and issues and employment. Okay, so 1918, sort of the first time in my non-professional historian view where I see something happening in law in the US to address disability, because in 1918, that's just after World War I ended, and there were disabled veterans. So there's like a concentration of individuals. Now, maybe again, I'm not, I wasn't there. Maybe there was a thought that a veteran was a particularly worthy type of disabled person, where perhaps others weren't. But by 1920, all of a sudden now there's a civilian vocational rehabilitation act that also addresses vocational issues and employment. So we see awareness beginning to expand. Then on my table in 1935, the Social Security Act, I placed that here not because it deals with disability, but because the very next thing in 1956, Social Security Disability Insurance, which does deal with disability, with healthcare and the financing of it, it arose as an expansion of the Social Security Act. So when that first expansion occurred in 1956, that enabled people who were at least 50 years old to qualify for assistance based on disability. Then the next item, 1960, so 4 years later, there was a further expansion that allowed people under 50 years old. So we see awareness beginning to expand. First, it's just the veterans, then it's the veterans and the civilians, then it's just the people over 50, and now it's no matter what your age is. And then there's a further expansion in 1965, the Social Security Act amendment that created Medicare and Medicaid. So now we have suddenly an interest in providing the act, or maybe I should say facilitating the access to healthcare and a willingness to put some money behind it because there is some funding in the federal government through this to provide Medicare and Medicaid to all people. Most closely related now to the ADA is in 1973, the Rehabilitation Act was passed. And so the Rehabilitation Act was actually a very comprehensive law. And for those who are curious, it was signed into law by a Republican president, Richard M. Nixon. And it was, in fact, the first federal civil rights and affirmative action law that applied to people with disabilities. And in one of the books I read, probably because of the reference to, because it was signed by Richard Nixon, who of course is also famous for Watergate, which is the scandal that involved breaking into the Democratic National Headquarters. So one of the authors says, signing of the Rehabilitation Act had created the circumstances in which Section 504, which is a civil rights section of the Rehabilitation Act, had broken and entered into the legal consciousness of the country. So we see a continual expansion of awareness. So just when we look at the passage of the laws, we see that something is developing there. But what if we look a little bit more deeply at the context to try to understand more completely what's really going on? So I'm going to share with you an expansion of that table that I just showed. So I just said the Americans with Disability Act is the first law that provided both the civil rights and affirmative action. So then let's expand our awareness on that front. And we see that actually prior to like Smith Sears, first in 1865, there was the 13th Amendment, which was a civil rights amendment that abolished slavery. Well, there were some problems with the 13th Amendment because it was a law saying this stuff can't happen. But in order to enforce that, the Civil Rights Act of 1875 needed to be passed because during Reconstruction, the period after Civil War, the southern states, now reconstituted into the US, continued to enact discriminating laws and regulations. And again, interestingly, from our perspective, the Civil Rights Act of 1875 was signed into law by a Republican president, Ulysses S. Grant. But let's just not forget that Republicans and Democrats kind of switched. At one point, the Republicans were more progressive, and now maybe they're less progressive. So this is kind of in that period when Republicans were perhaps more progressive. So then the next amendment to the table, that I've presented here is that we see between the two Rehabilitation Acts in 1918 and 1920 was the 19th Amendment, which gave the right to vote to women. So another Civil Rights Act. And now it's more perhaps relevant to say, oh, by the way, and in 1935, there was passed the Social Security Act that said we're going to make sure that the older people in our society can receive financial assistance. So when it was originally passed in 1935, the age at which you would qualify for benefits was 65. And there was also assistance provided to blind individuals, so some disabled individuals, and to children. So that's the first law that we see on the table that actually, if we go back to the wheel turning monarch, the Kakavati Sutta, this is the first time that we actually see a giving of money to the poor, or giving of money to the needy. The next addition here is Executive Order 9981, which happened in 1948. That is a civil rights order, and it ended racial segregation in the military, in the armed forces. And then shortly after that, in 1954, we have the Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education ending racial segregation in public education. And then a number of civil rights acts also appeared. So the Civil Rights Act of 1957, again, this is similar to the Civil Rights Act of 1875. It was intended to provide federal protection for African American citizens. Civil Rights Act of 1964 outright prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. And it prohibited unequal application of voter registration requirements, prohibited racial segregation in schools and public accommodations, and prohibited similarly related employment discrimination for protected individuals, meaning based on race, color, religion, and sex. Hard on that comes the Voting Right Act of 1965, which I think we may be aware of because it keeps coming up again in the news. The Fair Housing Act in 1968 we're starting to pull in the disabled community again. Well, actually, I'm sorry, the Fair Housing Act prevented housing discrimination based on those same characteristics, race, sex, religion, um, national origin. It did include disability and familial status. So disability was included within the Fair Housing Act, although not necessarily the target. And then we have the Architectural Barriers Act, which specifically said that facilities needed to be designed um, and built to be accessible for people with disabilities. However, the Architectural Barriers Act only applied to federal buildings or those in which federal funds were used for construction. So the Rehabilitation Act followed on that and expanded on that. But so then why did we need the ADA? Because as we see even today, once an act passed and it comes into law, there's regulations or guidance provided for how it should be implemented. But the guidance is guidance, it's not law. So the guidance is put together by whatever the administration is that's in power at that time. And then people that don't like what the guidance is challenge it. And there were many challenges to the Architectural Barriers Act, some of which the Supreme Court was finding in favor of those who were challenging these requirements, saying they were too expensive or unnecessary. So then that leads us again to now the need for the ADA. So I'm going to stop this share for a moment and talk a bit about, let's talk about the ADA. So like I've said, the ADA is disability is truly the ultimate intersectional identity. In order to pass the Americans with Disabilities Act, many intersections needed to be activated. Passage of the ADA is an excellent example of cross-movement organizing. So I can tell you that, for instance, some of the core, first of all, it was the activities that spearheaded the passage of the ADA were almost entirely led by disabled individuals. And there was sort of a core group of disabled individuals who created something called the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund in Berkeley, California in 1979. And at that moment, their focus was really just on legal defense and education in Berkeley. But very shortly, they began to realize that they wanted to have a larger impact because there's nothing that's ever going to protect Berkeley from the rest of the world and the Supreme Court, for instance. So they began to think, well, we need to go to the federal level. We need to get on the federal platform. And they specifically had a goal of changing, as they did this, of changing Washington's thinking of disability from a disease in need of remediation to a political position or intersection in need of civil rights. So the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 included civil rights provisions, but many of them were being struck down as unaffordable or unnecessary. So that identity of deserving civil rights as a disabled person was not firmly established. It was clear that was not firmly established by the Rehabilitation Act. So obviously, I've said that the ADA was passed in 1990, and there's a few years in between 1979 and 1990. I highly recommend a couple of books that um, I'll put in the chat if you're interested in reading about those years. One is Enabling Acts by Leonard J. Davis. Another one is the Disability Rights Movement. And it's by Doris James Fleischer. Did I spell this right? And her sister. So, in particular, I want to point out that this second book, The Disability Rights Movement, Frida James, although she has passed away, was a disabled person herself. So, that book in particular has been cultivated from that point of view. So, a lot of things happened that I'm not even going to try to summarize, but I'm just going to point out a couple of key things. Something that might curl your hair. There was an individual, Evan J. Kemp Jr., who became involved in the movement, and he was a legacy Democrat. And because of the connections that he had, he was actually prevailed upon. He was convinced that he should switch political parties because he would be able to have influence with specific individuals if he was able to say, I also identify as a Republican. And so he actually did that. And it turned out to be completely true. He was able to influence very significantly individuals that became key supporters of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I'm going to basically read for you, excuse me. In just a second, I'm going to read for you a list of individuals who were sort of the final group of politicians that were involved in passing the act. But one interesting event that happened along the way is that the bill had been drafted and was kind of like ready and actually had been launched. It had a huge sort of public announcement, and they were hoping to create a lot of energy and support behind their announcement. Um, and they did that that the announcement happened on the same day that the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded. So they got derailed because nobody was interested in talking to them anymore. But George H.W. Bush was the vice president at the time. And even though this was not going to be on the front of the table, he called the organizers in. They were told it was just going to be for a handshake photo op, but he sat down with them and talked for some 20 minutes and told them that he was going to really support this. And interestingly, he is in fact the president who signed the bill when he assumed office in the next tenure. So I want to read for you a list of the individuals and their identities who are on that final working group when finally, it's 1989 and we've been around the block a bunch of times trying to get this over the goal line. We've got a final working group of senators trying to get this passed. Senators, congressmen, politicians. Um, so Senator Ted Kennedy, who was a Democrat from Massachusetts, was a key supporter of the bill. Senator Kennedy had a sister, Rosemary, with intellectual disabilities. He had various physical impairments of his own. His son Teddy, when he was 12 years old, had bone cancer that resulted in a leg amputation. So he had significant personal involvement with disability. Senator Orrin Hatch, who was a Republican from Utah, had a brother who'd had polio and as a result lived with an iron lung. Through his experiences, he knew that even though his brother literally could not live without a machine to breathe for him, that his brother had gone on, received his college education, and become a very successful legal mind in the community. So he had significant personal experience with disability. Senator Tom Harkin, who was a Democrat from Iowa, had a brother who was born deaf. He had a nephew who was became a paraplegic through an army accident. And when the ADA passed, he became the first person ever to give a speech on the Senate floor in American Sign Language. There was a Senator, David Durenberger, who was a Republican from Minnesota. I'm not able to determine if there's a disability connection that this individual had. Senator Bob Dole, who was also a Republican, was disabled by a sniper's bullet in World War One. Not an elected official, Attorney General Richard Thornburgh was present in that working group, and he was a Republican from obviously appointed by a Republican administration from Pennsylvania, and he had a son with physical and intellectual disabilities. Moreover, he had lost his wife and two children in a car accident. A third child survived that accident but sustained traumatic brain injury. Um, Also present was the Secretary of Transportation, Samuel Skinner, who was a Republican from Illinois, not able to determine if there was a disability connection for him, a personal disability connection for him, and also George Bush's Chief of Staff, John Sununu. So in the room, at that moment when they were trying to get it finally over the goalpost, there were politicians from all parts of the country, from both political parties, who had various personal experiences, or in some cases, none whatsoever, with disability. So it was the ultimate intersectional or cross movement moment to make this all happen. I'm wondering right now if for any of you, any other movements come to mind that are intersectional in this way. Or perhaps even movements that might have failed intersectional calls. Anything come to mind for anybody? Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
When I think about intersectionality, one thing that comes up a lot is the issue for trans people accessing bathrooms. Not all disabled people have difficulty accessing bathrooms. But that as a wheelchair user, that's an issue for me. And although there's slightly different reasons between why I have trouble accessing a bathroom versus a trans person, I think that's certainly an area where there could be solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
Another one that I think about, I don't know, have you read Eli Clare's Pride and Exile, I think is the name.
I
He
haven't.
he,
Tell us.
he that I highly recommend it. Also talks about sort of the deinstitutionalization movement, having solidarity with the prison abolition movement. So those are two I think a lot about.
Yeah, thank you. One that always comes up for me, and I want to continue to invite other people, but one that always comes up for me is feminism, because at that moment, again, like I'm just describing for the ADA, the trying to get it over the goalpost, trying to get it over the goalpost, trying to get it over the goalpost. But at the moment when we're trying to get the vote over the goalpost for women, women of color got dropped. It's like, oh, well, we can't do that now. We're gonna have to try to do that later, you know. So the intersectionality of it got fumbled. And I don't really think it's recovered. I don't think it's ever recovered, because you can find a lot of feminists that think, well, that was effective because eventually everybody got the vote. But have we actually healed the rift that was created? What else? Anything come to mind, Amanda or Stephanie?
I will just say, I think Zach nailed it on the head with the bathroom thing. As a wheelchair user as well, I definitely feel some camaraderie to not only that, but I have a good friend who's also completely blind, and he also needs like a single stall bathroom that does not, accessible bathrooms for him are a big deal as well, for a completely different reason than mine. But uh, I do feel camaraderie there. So thanks, Zach, for bringing that up.
Yeah. And I think this also goes to the same the same issue, like with the Rehabilitation Act, how protections were sort of being degraded. Well, the ADA came in and it's better, right? And it has sort of requirements, but there's a lot of flexibility in how the requirements can be met. Sometimes, like literally in terms of square feet, as opposed to like, wait a minute, what's the layout? Can my mobility scooter even get into that place? You know, so there's still a lot of work to be done. Accessibility is really not. It's not. It's a long way from. I think from even 50%. Um, And part of it is because of, infrastructure. But I was astonished to learn, well, I was pleased and astonished that there's so I grew up in Chicago. I still live close to Chicago. And if y'all are, familiar, there's literally like an elevated train that goes through around the, so there's this one of the major stations that's going to be closed for a 3-year renovation. That part of what's going to happen is it's going to make it accessible. But if you are trying to ride the subway or the L, because they connect with one another, as a disabled person, you have you have no idea. Can I get in there? And if I get in there and I get to my station, can I get out? You just don't know. It's so far from accessible. And it's always the money. It's always the money. Oh, I can't afford. We look at the money and we go, I can't, as opposed to trying to think, well, how? How? Amanda, did you want to throw something in?
Oh, I don't know. I never really understood accessibility before I got COVID. And I'm just thinking like in 10 years, and we look back, what's this going to do? How are we going to view it just in terms of disability justice in general? Because places are like, because it's invisible, it's a
Yeah.
potentially disabling or fatal, virus, but it's very hard to like, I can't assess my risk very well. Just, I don't know. That's just what I'm dealing with on a daily basis, and just like, where are we going to go with this, because
Yeah.
it's, because we have this, policy of denial right now and just, yeah.
Yeah, I just to second that, Amanda, a lot of times it seems to me that, you know, I would call that an ableist mind frame that does that because
Right.
e-
Ableism.
everybody that's not that no longer perceives themselves as being threatened wants to just forget it. I'm not threatened. I'm able to take this risk. Let's just forget it. So it's the ableist thinking that really
Yeah.
infuses thought, but political thought. So, like I said, the when the disability rights and education defense fund people left Berkeley and went to Washington in the late 70s, early 80s, they wanted to change the thinking about disability um, from like something that you treat to something that has civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that that's really fully happened yet. We're closer. We made some steps, but there's still a lot of the oh poor you thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to share with you. I think I actually believe I shared this last month, but again, because I feel what we're talking about this month really has so much to do with intersectionality, I want to share this quote from Kimberly Crenshaw because it was such a brilliant contribution that she came up with this term. So she says, I would say intersectional failure is the consequence of a political vision that is meant to be transformative, but it fails to fully interrogate many of the baselines upon which it is activated. And in that failure, it makes itself vulnerable to political conditions that actually rob the movement of its ability to do what it even claims it wants to do. So I want to pass the ADA, but oh, it's so expensive. Maybe I can't pay attention to whether or not they've renovated, their 500 L stations. They've got 3 of them done. That's pretty good. So, in part because it's a core issue for me, but I just think it's such an excellent um, example of intersectional failure. I want to turn for just a moment to racism and to the end of the Civil War and the move into Reconstruction. So, and maybe as I do that, I'm going to just share, I actually have a third version of that table that I shared earlier. So this kind of brings, again, so this column that I have added here on the right that I've titled Nothing About Us Without Us, it's bringing in what I'm calling some more context. So before the 13th Amendment, which was abolishing slavery, we had the US Civil War, and the end of the US Civil War and the eminent passage, that the fact that the Emancipation Proclamation already existed, and the eminent passage of the 13th Amendment directly led to Abraham Lincoln's assassination. But then we have a period where we've got a civil rights act that's passed, but mostly we're just kind of like hanging loose. Before I said, like the Smith-Sears Veterans Rehabilitation Act, well, it was immediately preceded by World War I, where in war we create a lot of disabled people. The Social Security Act, it was preceded by the stock market crash and the Great Depression, which caused a lot of people, not just like all unfortunate people, to lose their financial security. And really, very significantly, in 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt became president. Now, he had been disabled by polio. He was a wheelchair user. But back in 1933, you could hide that. And he did. He hid that from a lot of people. There were very few people. It wasn't in the popular awareness that there was, oh, we have a disabled president. But he's the guy who passed the Social Security Act. Okay? So now we have nothing about us without us. We've got somebody who has some direct knowledge of how this all works, how access to money creates this fragility. He signs the Social Security Act, which I'm basically saying it kind of starts this cascade, because after the Social Security Act, we see two more wars, World War II and the Korean War, and then the Vietnam War. So we're just creating disabled people right and left. So we're expanding this pool of individuals. And it's becoming harder and harder to marginalize them because we actually made them go off and get disabled. So context, it can really lend a lot. But I want to focus now just for a second on this moment here between the ending of the Civil War and Reconstruction. And I'm just going to share with you some of what was going on. So and if anybody's like a major historian and you want to add better facts, please chime in. But when it became very apparent, that the North was going to win, and all along the North, the continuing U.S. federal government is trying to envision, well, what's Reconstruction going to look like? How do we bring these people back in? And there was always kind of like this weird floating nebulous group where kind of like the border states that never really seceded from the Union. The border states between the North and the South, they hadn't seceded, but they had slavery. So how are we going to deal with them? So on the one hand, in a way, we didn't, because they never seceded, so they were never subject to Reconstruction. So then that presents an issue. Like if I've emancipated all the slaves, I need to emancipate all the slaves from, I've emancipated all the slaves from these border states as well, but I haven't changed any of the workings of law that allows for marginalization. And then I just want to compare for you So Lincoln, before he was assassinated, he had put forth in Congress what he called the 10% plan for Reconstruction. So it called for a provisional government at the end of the war in those seceded states, with some sort of provisional leadership, presumably like a military government, military governorship. And then in order to reestablish as a state with full state rights in the United States, the 10% plan called for 10% of pre-war voters in any seceded state. So pre-war voters, meaning white property males, to make a pledge of future loyalty. In exchange for that pledge of future loyalty, when they reach that 10% threshold, they could reconstitute, they could hold a constitutional convention for the state and sort of reconstitute. Their state constitution would have to accept the abolition of slavery. And here's one of the scary parts. And this is a quote: so long and so far as not modified or declared void by a decision of the Supreme Court. That was Abraham Lincoln's plan. He said you have to abolish slavery as long as the Supreme Court never says you don't have to anymore. As far as voting rights, because the 10% was based on the pre-war qualifications, no blacks would be voting in this, and that meant they wouldn't have any input into the state constitution either. So it continued to disenfranchise African Americans. So why is this interesting? Besides the obvious, it's because Congress actually said, if you do that, I think it's going to cause problems. I think we will have just spent X number of years in war with a lot of people dying, and the southern states are just going to go back to their old tricks. So we think you should do something different. And they put together the Wade Davis bill, which actually was passed by Congress, but Lincoln refused to sign it. So the Wade Davis bill said, yeah, the provisional government will be military governors, but in order to have a constitutional convention and reconstitute as a state, then a majority of all white males in the state, majority, not 10%, must take a loyalty pledge. Their loyalty pledge, instead of being a pledge of future loyalty, it had to include an ironclad oath of past and future loyalty, meaning they had to fully repudiate succession. And if they had been successionists and it could be proved that they were successionists, they were not qualified as part of the majority. They had to grant freedom to all slaves in Confederate states, and they had to provide guarantees of equality before the law for all the freedmen under the reconstructed Southern states. Now, there had been a consideration of including people of color in the majority threshold, but the senators or representatives felt that would kill the bill, that they'd never be able to get enough people to agree. So they left that out. But the interesting thing is that, again, Lincoln refused to sign it. So he sort of what they call pocket vetoed it. And then when he was assassinated, his successor, Andrew Johnson, essentially put together much like that 10% plan. And just as the Congress had foretold, the southern states went back to their old tricks, necessitating the Civil Rights Bill of 1875, and I would say landing us in 2025 in the soup that's never been clarified. So it's an intersectional failure, in part brought about by from what I'm reading, just a refusal to believe that people will have different ethics than you. That if they're going to say they're going to be loyal, that's cool. And if the Constitution says that each state should be able to set its own, if the US Constitution says that each state should be able to set its own laws, we need to let them do that, even if we're abolishing slavery. Federally, we still need to let them set their own laws, which allows for discrimination. So there was no true and clear perspective of civil rights for people of color at the time. And I'd say maybe there still isn't. Some of us, it's clear, but it's just like that ableist thinking. If it's clear to me, then everybody must see it. And we miss the fact that actually, no, they don't. They don't. They don't see it. So that's what I have to get real with, is this my intersectional failure to see where our roads are really crossing. I think people have equity and you don't. So again, brought up for purposes of, I think it's a really clear example of intersectional failure. So this brings us to our sharing time. Would anybody like to share about anything?
Just
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna.
Bye, Zach.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
being here.
That was
Go ahead,
really
Amanda.
enjoyed the meditation. Sorry. So just thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm so glad. I'm so glad.
Oh, I can totally piggyback on that. As that I was going to say, what I really enjoyed about the meditation was the visual of the blanket and that being like snow. I totally love that and will carry that forward. But I also wanted to say I appreciate all the research that you've done because I love your chart. I'm a mathematician at heart. And so when I see a spreadsheet, it warms my heart so much. And I love seeing it all laid out like that. That visually for me will stick in my brain so well. So I really love that. And I hope you put that into the blog so that I can reference it when I need to.
I have to figure out how to do that. I've been wondering about I don't know how to upload a PDF into my blog. I will figure something out for sure. I will figure something out.
Can you put
moment,
pictures? You could save it maybe as a picture too.
There you go. That's probably what I need to do.
Yep.
I might just have to save one. We'll see. I'll figure it out. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And I really hope, that if as time goes on, if there's other sort of intersectional failures or your intersectional successes, like I think the ADA is an intersectional success. I'm trying to figure out how to get this light and not be right behind, like right there. That's better. But I would love to hear of what they are, what your thoughts are on other intersectional failures or successes. The failures are probably way too abundant. We could all come up with them, but the successes are even more valuable.
I will definitely put some thought towards it and see if I can't come up with some.
We'll
So,
make a table together, Stephanie.
yeah, there we go. Again, you're talking my language.
The intersectional success table. That would be a great thing to have.
Love it.
So I just want to share really quickly. Next month, the January 4th, we're going to be talking about recognizing wholeness. And I'm sure you guys have all seen it. Oh, now why did I put two different dates? I put January 4th and January 5th. Shame on me. Let me tell you which one it is. I have to open my calendar. It's actually January 4th. Okay, so on Sunday, January 4th, we're going to talk about recognizing wholeness. You can visit the blog in between times. You can email me in between times. There's a Thursday practice at 1 p.m. Obviously, you can revisit the recordings. I'll put them out short. We'll put this month's recording out shortly. I really recommend South Sea Sangha, although they're not going to have a practice until January 26th, so we won't be able to practice with them. Before our next meeting. And meanwhile, I just want to, again, just really reiterate how much I appreciate you being here and having the opportunity to share with you and be with you.
Thank you, Laura. This has been great. Appreciate you.
Anybody want to dedicate the merit of our practice? Okay, so then maybe what I'll do is I'll invite a dedication that we may all receive insight into our own intersectionality, and that while there are so many intersectional failures, that we might actually have the capacity to allow just the intersectional success of our existence to really sink in and be appreciated by each of us. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank
I'll
you.
see you all again soon.
Stay warm. Bye.
Bye.